Hey, guess what? Turns out this pink little adorable puff ball has been around for over 25 years at this point. 25 years of devouring enemies, absorbing their abilities, and using them to free his home from the clutches of bad peoples. Oh no, he's gonna get me. But of all the many games in the series, tons of fans point to Kirby 64 as their favorite of the bunch, citing its unique ability stacking as the definitive feature, which allowed ability combinations like Explosive Snowman, Double-Bladed Laser Sword, and my personal favorite, Melting Ice Block.
Andrew, what the heck does that have to do with development? Ice is cold, cold is Sprite, Sprite unused. Nailed it.
So on this episode of Beta 64, let's learn all about the development of Kirby 64 and the Crystal Shards. Kirby 64 began its development in September of 1997, originally being designed for the Nintendo 64 disk drive, along with other games like Mother 3 and Fire Emblem 64. But with the Nintendo 64 disk drive being an utter failure, Kirby and the other disk drive titles began being ported over to cartridge form. And luckily for Kirby 64, it actually got a release 3 years later, unlike many of those scrap ports. But not to worry, throughout Kirby 64's development, there were a lot of things that were scrapped instead. To start, let's look at the storyboard sequence for the game's introduction, which appeared on HAL Laboratories' website after the game released in Japan. Looking at the beginning of this sequence, you'll notice that there isn't a whole lot different. I mean, the Ripple Star sure changed, and so did the Fairy Queen, but the story sequence is relatively the same. That is until we get to Kirby, or should I say, Kirby and Friends. In the final game, Kirby is seen peacefully looking up at the stars until he gets slammed into the ground by Ribbon, and then to top it off, the Crystal Shard makes a dent in his head too. After this shabasco, Kirby and Ribbon combine crystals and then head off towards the sunrise. And that's when the adventure begins. And so do a bunch of changes. See, originally when Ribbon crash landed, there were more people watching the fall than just Kirby. There was Waddle Dee, King Dedede, and Adeline too. Adeline. What the? I'm Googling it. Hold up. Oh, here we go. How to pronounce Kirby. There we go.
Adeline, Kirby.
Adeline is a reference to how she draws the punish reference. I say Adeline myself. Japanese Adeline. There's no answer. If I pick one, someone's gonna get mad. Freak. I don't know. Adeline. There was Waddle Dee, King Dedede, and Adeline too, each doing their own little thing. Kirby was also doing something different too, originally eating an apple instead of stargazing. After that, Ribbon crash lands in front of Kirby instead of on him, and throughout this next sequence, Ribbon also seems to be a bit more cautious of Kirby compared to the final. That is until Kirby shows her the crystal he found. After that, just like the final, they combine and once again head off towards the horizon. It should also be noted that many of these characters shown in the storyboard actually have dialogue. Heck, even Kirby. And it's not just like, what does Kirby sound like? It's real words. In the final game though, none of them say a single word. It's unknown whether or not this dialogue in the storyboard was actually planned to be said in the game, or if it was just to give more details to the cutscene creators. Either way, it was never used in the final introduction sequence. Now, it turns out there's actually a reason why these characters were planned to be shown that much in the intro instead of focusing just on Kirby. And the reason can be seen as we move on to an actual build of the game, which was shown in a Japanese magazine sometime before the year 2000. This screenshot featured an early version of the HUD with portraits of not only Kirby, but also King Dedede, Waddle Dee, and Adeline. Why are they there? Well, that's because they were originally playable characters. Yeah, playable characters. You ever think it was weird how all 4 characters appear so much in the final game? Like the title screen, the game over sequence, the cutscene, the level select, etc. It's because they were all originally playable. In fact, in June of 1999, more screenshots started surfacing showcasing each of these characters completely playable in the game. Now, of course, if you have played Kirby 64 before, you know that you can only play as Kirby and sometimes King Dedede in the final game. But from these images, you can see that originally you could have played as any of the characters in any of the levels, each with their own special abilities. Like how Waddle Dee would have been able to lift enemies, as you can see in this screenshot, and apparently he could have hidden in objects too from the look of this concept art. After looking through all the development of this game, it seems June of 1999 was the huge kazooga of Kirby 64 screenshots. And of course, the reason for that was E3. That convention also happened to be the first time that anyone got to see video footage of the game, though it really wasn't much. The game, simply being called Kirby 64 at the time, was shown on the show floor for around 30 seconds. Actually, even that's not entirely true. Despite the top left corner of the video always saying Kirby 64, a good chunk of the footage is actually from Super Smash Bros., which is an incredibly odd choice for the video editors to make. Why would you combine two games and call it one? But even if we didn't really get to see much of the actual game, what we did get to see is a pink blurry blob running around an early version of Rockstar Stage 3. Turns out a ton of this stage was changed in the year between this footage and the game's release. Honestly, the only thing that's really the same is that both builds have Kirby falling through a hole in the ceiling at the start, but after that, almost everything changed. In fact, it was so much different that comparing this footage quickly became a humongous pain. But thanks to the Beta Compare Club, specifically the 23rd Gamer, thank you, we managed to get all of this compared in just a few days. You can check it out in more detail at club.beta64.tv, but for now, let me give you the highlights. First off, there's a bunch of enemies in the E3 footage that don't appear in the actual stage, like these Bronto Burts and Bouncies. Plus there's also a Chili here on the upper level of the stage, despite the fact that it only appears on the lower levels in the final version. But those enemies aren't the reason why comparing this footage was so difficult, it's because this stage lacks so many of the defining features present in the final version. Actually, the final version is mostly just hills anyway, so there wasn't any defining features to begin with, except for a few landmarks like the skeleton, which never appeared in the E3 footage. There is one place that's very distinct though, the waterfalls here. Basically, there's a point in the stage where you go down one of two holes in the ground, and depending on which one you pick, you'll either end up on the path to the left or the right of this one waterfall. Turns out, the E3 footage shows this part of the stage as well, and it's fundamentally the same, but cosmetically, it's incredibly different, with the most obvious change being the removal of these two waterfalls from the E3 build, and the fact that the water looks purple in this footage, but is obviously blue in the final version. Not to mention, the paths are completely covered in sand here, but that was later changed to just a stone path with piles of sand instead. What's going on these paths also changed too. The closer path has stars on it in the final game, but has absolutely nothing at E3, and those Sandmen that litter the far path, well, they were all originally just a single a spider, before it was replaced. So that concluded E3 1999, but fans would still see a lot more Kirby 64 in the months to come, like for instance in late August for Space World 1999. Kirby 64 got its own proper gameplay trailer then too, with almost a whole minute of Kirby goodness. This trailer turns out to have a ton of differences that are just ready to be discussed, like the fact that this build was not controlled with the D-pad like the final, but originally used the analog stick to control Kirby instead. Or how about the fact that the game's logo, which was shown at the beginning of this video, is so much simpler than what it eventually became. A good change on Nintendo's part. So what other changes did Nintendo make from this trailer? Well, let's dive in and find out, shall we? First, the HUD obviously, which as you can see is pretty much completely different than the final, like how the health is shown in half circles on the top instead of full circles in the center. And in its place, the center was originally taken by this star counter, which fills up with 1 of 6 stars for every 5 stars that you collect. The final in comparison has the star counter as a simple tick meter, where 1 star equals 1 tick. After doing a bit of math, it seems that both the early and final versions required Kirby to collect 30 stars before getting rewarded with a 1-up. So that's the same between these two builds. But what about the bottom meter? Well, it turns out the bottom of the Space World HUD is a bit of a mystery. While we never get to see it change from 0 half pies in the footage, we can kind of guess what it was meant to be thanks to a few hints. First, since it's made up of half circles, it's very possible that this was also meant to be a life counter. More specifically, probably a boss life counter. So instead of repurposing the star meter as a boss life meter like the final does, perhaps this bottom counter was meant to fill once Kirby encountered a boss. It's entirely possible, and honestly, makes a lot of sense. All of these changes are child's play though compared to all of the ability icons that were altered. Literally every single one of them were edited before release, with the exception of the snowman ability. Not to mention, some of the abilities themselves were changed as well, like the stone ability for instance. Though most of it stayed the same, Kirby's color is slightly different between the builds, being brown instead of gray, and also in this early build, Kirby still has the ability to jump in this form, which was later on removed. The ability combinations were shown off in the trailer too, which changed quite a bit compared to the stone ability.
For example, check out Snowman plus Bomb, which in the final game transfers Kirby into an explosive snowman. In the Space World build, however, he's surrounded by a huge block of ice and then just explodes. Not nearly as creative as the final version, so I'm glad they made that change. Stone plus Spark goes the opposite way though. The original is so much better than what they changed it to, because instead of giving Kirby the ability to levitate a boulder with electricity, originally Kirby would have turned into a freaking EEPROM chip. Like, how absurd is that? It's hilarious. It's not like Kirby as a chip. It's not pink. It doesn't have eyes. It's like, he's a chip now. Enjoy our new game, Kirby Chip 4. Moving on, let's take a look at some of the screenshots that circulated around the time of this footage. This one shows off an early version of Rockstar Stage 2, a very early version. I mean, look, the bridge is completely different, still being intact, and the pyramid over there is blue instead of black. Plus, the enemies are different, and that's a fact. Not to mention, there's a lot more grass out there in the back, and the pillars there too, which are outside the track, are broken in the final, but this screenshot has them making a comeback. Okay, I'm sorry, I'll stop. Just around a month after Space World, IGN started uploading some screenshots of an early Kirby 64. In September specifically, they were of an early version of King Dedede's castle interior. The first one here is a pretty obvious change, the background, which is a straight path in the early version instead of being two sets of slope steps as it is in the final. The enemies shown in this screenshot are different too, with the Bronto Burt that flies from the background originally being a Zeus, and also there's supposed to be a Sir Kibble to the left of Kirby that's not seen here, though it is possible that it was defeated by the player right before the screenshot was taken, so we've really got no way to tell if it was there or not. A couple months later, IGN gave us some more sweet screenshots, but we're going to focus on the one here showing an early Aquastar Stage 3. The thing is though, there really isn't anything to compare here because I can't seem to find this part in the level anywhere in the final game. Seems the layout changed quite a bit in the time since the screenshot was taken, but there's still some things that we can compare here, like how the skybox was definitely changed, proven by the lack of star clouds. Not to mention the cannons that shoot Kirby in the stage are much farther back in the water in this early screenshot. Though that's about all we can compare here. January of 2000. Once again we got some new screenshots, this time of the intro cutscene. The first image shows off the beginning of the intro, with the only change being the skybox, whose realistic clouds were replaced with some adorable hearts and rings later on in development. Another image uploaded in January shows us the end of that same cutscene, with the only changes being the removal of the flowers on the left, and this strange ring of light on the right. Now before we move on, there's one more screenshot I want us to take a look at, and it's from February of 2000, just about a month before the game's release in Japan. It shows off Swiss Army Kirby, which was created by combining two needle abilities. The only difference here is that the tuning fork shown to the right of Kirby was replaced with a cactus in the final release. I have no idea why they do that, but they did it. And that's the way it is. Anyone feeling 2012? Because I'm feeling 2012. That was Kirby's 20th anniversary. During that time, Nintendo released a couple of art books that showed off early concept art for many Kirby games, including Kirby 64. The first piece we'll look at is the book bundle with Kirby's Dream Collection Special Edition. It shows off the plan for a scrapped rhythm minigame where players would have played along with the song by pressing specific buttons shown on the on-screen sheet music. Everyone would have joined in this hit new band,
featuring Adeline on keyboard, King DDD on drums, Waddle Dee on tambourine, and Kirby on
guitar? How? He doesn't have fingers. You can't, how? Japan got another art book later on, a country exclusive this time called Hoshino Kirby Poo 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 Taizen. It showed off quite a bit more Kirby 64 compared to the last book we saw, like this early concept art for the stage and character selection. According to the storybook, you would have went a little something like this. First, you would select your planet, which is normal. Then you would select your stage, which instead of being on a notebook on the ground, was shown plastered in front of a nice landscape background. After that, you'd choose your character, which was scrapped later on. And after that character is chosen, the one that you did choose would run off from the group into the level, which is technically the same as the final game, but since Kirby's the only playable character, he's the only one that runs away from the group. And finally, Ribbon flies away with the character, which is the same until they get into the level. Originally, Ribbon would have been seen flying ahead of the player once reaching the stage, but in the final, she only appears in the level when collecting a crystal shard. But thinking about it, it would have made a lot more sense to see her flying ahead, seeing as she flew with the player to begin with when leaving the stage selection screen. This same art book shows off another early storyboard, This time for Desert Desserts cutscene, which shows us quite a few changes, especially in camera angles, which, I mean, I guess is to be expected, but the real interesting parts are the ones that don't match up anywhere in the final. Turns out, unlike the final, the cutscene originally didn't start with Kirby begging for his life as the cruel desert slowly took away every last bit of his strength while his eyes forcibly showed him the food he only wished he could consume in order to help dull the intense and unending pain! Instead, the storyboard showed the gang just chatting it up after collecting a crystal shard. No big deal here. Kirby then happily suggests a picnic and the gang starts chowing down on some delicious food, similar to how it is in the final, though the food they eat is a bit different. Like how Kirby is licking ice cream instead of eating apples and cake. And how Ribbon, who wasn't eating anything in the final, appears to be eating something. I'm gonna say it's a crepe. I like crepes. After that, the crystal shard opens into a portal, everyone jumps in, and then they're all whisked away into the clouds in order to get to the next planet. The final, though, has Kirby blissfully unaware of the situation, and instead is dragged into the portal by none other than the Triple D King. No, not him! The other Triple D King! There we go. Jeez. For some weird reason, though, that's not all. Oh no. On the bottom left corner of this storyboard, there is a horrifying depiction of Kirby, staring off into the distance with two lifeless eyes and a mouth full of sharp teeth. Turns out this was actually an idea brought up by Reggie Files-A-Me himself for his movie concept, Silence of the Waddle Dees. Speaking of a small piece of concept art that remains to tell of a tale, this little piece shows Adeline painting Kirby's animal friend Coo into the world. Apparently, much like Kirby's Dreamland 2 and 3, Kirby would have originally been able to call in his animal friends to help him on his adventure. Specifically, he would have been able to call the ones from Dreamland 3. Sadly though, this idea was scrapped in the end, with the only surviving reference being a music track left over in the final game, which you can only listen to after beating the game and going into soundcheck. This is called Music 002, and it turns out to be a remix of the first Animal Friends theme from Dreamlands 3. Take a listen. You know, that track technically isn't unused, is it, if you can reach into sound test? So, while we're on the subject of what it could have been, let's look at the Kirby 64 unused findings, straight from the lovely folks at the cutting room floor. First up, we got an early graphic sheet featuring a ton of unused character portraits. Now think back in this video. Remember before we saw a screenshot showing off an early build of the game using character portraits? Comparing these unused ones with that screenshot, from the looks of it, this unused graphic sheet is actually earlier than what's shown in that build. How much earlier? Well, some speculate that the numbers under Kirby 64 on the unused sheet may be the dates that these portraits were made. So that would be October 30th, 1998. Though that's, once again, just speculation. Those playable character portraits obviously aren't the only ones on the sheet though. There's some of those early portraits of Kirby's animal friends, which as we learned earlier, were originally able to be summoned into the world by Adeline. But since all these ideas are scrapped, so is this portrait sheet, lost in the bits and the bytes until it was found by one lucky data miner at offset 9D8CC0. Thanks whoever you were, you're doing the Lord's work. Now on to the really cool stuff. You ready for this? Kirby 64 has 6 unused test rooms that are still in the game, accessible by GameShark codes. So what do you say? Why don't we check them all out? You and me, together, like we used to. Like a family. The first one we'll look at is called Abe 200. Abe 200 is a green, blocky, unused test room featuring Adeline, who will paint you a free 1-up, which Kirby can collect. But it's not really going to do much use to you, is it? Since you can't leave, and you can't die. No matter what you do, there's no escape from the inevitable eternity awaiting this pink puffball. Moving on, turns out there's another stage under the Abe title series called Abe 100. But this one is entirely different, featuring one open area for testing different ground types. The level designers were nice enough to label each one of them for us in katakana. So here's what each one of them represents from left to right. Ice, snow, sand, wood, cloud, grass, iron, mud, slippery. Besides that, there's really nothing else that's interesting around here, except for some random blocks scattered about, but who really cares about that when you've got the next incredible, intriguing test room called Test 1. We can guess from the name that this might have been an enemy test room, but loading it up, it's really just an empty gray void that Kirby falls endlessly down until he eventually dies. It's likely that this place was originally intended to test enemies at first, but whatever it was originally, it's not there now. Turns out this test room generated enough money in the box office to finalize a sequel called Test 2. This one is at least a bit more interesting than the previous one, though not by much. It's a box room with a light blue, gray, and purple checkerboard in the background, and on the left, there's a tall box that Kirby can fly into, but really, beyond that, there's nothing to this place either. Dang. What about the next test room? Break Test 1. That sounds delicious. Seems to be a pretty standard room as well, with just a few boxes of various sizes to jump onto. If it wasn't for the incredibly broken and distracting background and foreground, I'd have to call this one the most uninteresting of them all. But it seems that this very strange and very broken background effect has saved the day in a very odd way. Lucky for us, this last test room is actually, for real, pretty darn interesting. It's called Item 01 and features a butt ton of food and stars. Some of them are on the ground, others are on the top lines of broken blocks with no collision, and still others are floating over a pool of water, which, just like the floating blocks from before, has no collision either. Now that might be all the test rooms in the game, but we've still got a couple more things to look at. Unused music tracks, of course. Turns out the unused Animal Friends theme from before was just the start. So let's see what else we got here. Well, it seems the game includes 2 different linked versions of the classic Kirby stage end theme that for some strange reason was never used in the final game. That's really odd now that I think about it. Here, take a listen to both. And to bring this episode to a wonderful close, there's another unused music track in the game that's really not music, per se. It's someone repeating Iroha, a traditional Japanese poem which is kind of like a Japanese version of the ABC song. The voice reciting the poem was sped up a bunch, pitched up, and put on repeat until the very end where it starts cutting out sporadically. I promise, it's not as creepy as I made it sound. Some think that because of the sporadic ending, this voice was meant to be played on the TVs in Shiver Star Stage 3. Take a listen.
I'm tired. I'm going to Japan at 4 a.m. tomorrow for a 14-hour flight, and I just finished this video. I'm gonna get like 4 hours of sleep. Ow. So follow me on Twitter if you want to see my Japan travels. You know what? That's all I gotta say. I'm just so tired. click the playlist to watch more of my videos. They're fun. Ha! Okay, I'm really tired. I need to shut this off. Break out.